Hello, this is Jürgen Theis from Electronic Software. I'm a member of the developer team that is responsible for developing the base software layers that are used in all of our HTML5 products. In this video, I would like to talk about the calendars and how you can work with calendars in Gantt charts when using the Visual Scheduling Widget. If you schedule resources, for example, as a production or a project planner, then you are faced with working and non-working times. And these times are essential for the scaling process. And it doesn't matter whether you are scaling human resources or non-human resources like machines or departments. For instance, your employees have clearly defined working times, they have holidays, or sometimes they are ill. And the machines, for example, they are not available all the time because, for example, they have to be maintained or they have to be transported, or there are any constraints depending on the processes. For example, if you think about melting furnaces, they need some time to achieve the right temperature after shutdown. Working and non-working times are defined in the Visual Scheduling Widget by calendar objects, and they have impact on the visualization and on the user interactions in the Gantt charts. A calendar defines the general availability of a resource, and it does not consider any capacity of a resource. It's only an array of entries, and each of these entries indicates whether it is a working or a non-working time for a period defined by a start and an end date. Now let's see how we can define a calendar object. For this, the widget offers the method addCalendars, and this method expects an array of calendar definitions. And here in this example, we define one calendar. We give the calendar an ID and an array of entries. And each entry is defined by a start and by an end date. And in this case, we have two entries defined. The first is on the 4th January 2021 from 6 to 12 o'clock, and the second entry is on the same day from 2 to 6 p.m. Now, there's one thing you should keep in mind, and that is that the default time type of the Visual Scheduling Widget is non-working time. So if we define here a calendar with the two entries, then we define the working times of this calendar. To give you the full flexibility, you can also define the time types of the entries explicitly. Here we see an alternative definition of the same calendar, and this time we have used the time type. In the first entry, this is now defined from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and it has the time type working time. And our second entry, it's now from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. and this has the time type non-working time. And both definitions define the same calendar. And it depends on your specific situation whether it's better for you to use time types or not. At this point, please let me add a comment regarding the date formats. Here we are using the local date format, and this is because we would like to make it easy for you to reproduce this sample code and to get the same display as you see in the slideshow. But we recommend for clarity to use the simplified ISO 8601 standard, and this means that you have to add a Z at the end of these date strings. Now let's see how the calendars are displayed in the Visual Scheduling widget. As I mentioned before, the default of the widget is non-working time. And here we see the resources view of the Gantt widget with some resources. And we see the light gray background in the diagram part. And this light gray background indicates that at the moment there's non-working time, and this is because no calendar is applied. Now we can apply the calendar we have just defined by the widget option default calendar ID. And if we set this default calendar ID to the ID of the calendar we have just defined, then we see now the white stripes here in the diagram part. And we see it from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. and from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And these white stripes exactly indicate the working times we have just defined. And all resources are affected by this calendar. In practice, it's more realistic that resources have different calendars. And for example, here we see that the resource 2 has a calendar that is different to the calendars of the other resources. And to define such an individual calendar, we can use the resource property calendar ID. And for example, here we see that we can use the update resources method of the widget. And in this case, we have set the property calendar ID of the resource 2 to a different calendar ID. In this case, we use calendar 2. And as we have seen before, the default calendar was calendar 1. And this way, we can define an individual calendar for each resource. Till now, we have seen how calendars are displayed in the background of a Gantt chart. But the calendars have also impact on the bar display. And here in this case, we see an allocation bar, and this allocation bar starts in a working time, it crosses a non-working period, and it ends in the next working time. And we can choose the allocation property PM color and set it to steel blue, and as a result the entire bar is colored in this steel blue color. There's also another allocation property called PM non-working time color, and in this case we have set this color to a special color called calculated, and the result is that the part of the bar that crosses the non-working time has a color that is calculated from the bar color and the color of the non-working time. So for example, if we have here a red allocation bar or a green allocation bar, then this part that crosses the non-working time will adapt to the specific color of the allocation. And of course, we can set this non-working time color property also to regular color. In this case, we have chosen the color tomato, and then we see that this part of the allocation bar that crosses the non-working time is colored with tomato. As great as the display of the non-working times may be, sometimes it's very annoying. And for this reason, there is a possibility to visually collapse the non-working times. And as we can see here, we have a small Gantt chart with 4 resources, and we see at the moment one day, the Monday, the 4th of January, and we have here the case where all resources are using the same calendar, so they have the same non-working and the same working times. And now we can use the widget option non-working time visible. If we set this option to false, then we get this diagram. And as you can see here, first, we not only see the Monday, but we see also a part of the Sunday before the Monday, and we see a part of the Tuesday, and we see in the time scale these double lines. And these double lines indicate that at this position a non-working time has been collapsed. And as a result is that in this case we do not see any working time. And another effect is that we see with the same time resolution more of the time scale. When using this option, please note that only those non-working times can be collapsed that are common to all resources. For example, if we have a look at this part here, then between 12 o'clock p.m. and 2 p.m. this area cannot be collapsed because we have here non-working time as well as working time. So as a result, only these parts that are red shaded in this figure can be collapsed. So the result of the collapsion will be this diagram. Here we see this part remains, this middle part also remains, and this part also remains. Nevertheless, I think it's a very helpful option to get more compact diagrams and to have the focus on the most important times in your chart. Last but not least, let's see the impact of the calendars on user actions. Here in this sample, we see that the user is just moving a bar, and we see the phantom bar of this allocation. And as you can see, the length of the bar changes as soon as the bar is crossing the non-working time. So the bar gets longer or shorter depending on its position. And another impact is if you are using snapping targets. For this you can see the properties of the activities and allocation called PM snap targets for start and PM snap targets for end. And in this case you can use the calendar grids as targets. Till now, our focus has been on the resources view, but of course, you can also use the calendars in the activities view. But by default, there's no calendar grid displayed in the activities view. But nevertheless, you can assign a calendar to activity, and these calendars are respected when you collapse the non-working times. And to display the calendar grid, you have to set the widget option PM activity calendars enabled. And if you set this option to true, then you will also see the activities calendars in the activities view. At the end of this video, I would like to explain the difference between calendars and period highlighters. A period highlighter in the Visual Scheduling Widget is just a graphical element that allows you to visually highlight a certain period. And in contrast to calendars, it has no effect at all on user interactions, and it's not considered in any calculation processes. And you can define period highlighters by the widget method addPeriodHighlighters. And as with all the objects known in the widget, this method also expects an array of objects. And here we see the object has an ID and an array of entries. And each entry has a start and an end date. You can set a color to this period highlighter. You can set a caption and you can also set a caption color. And the result of this example is such a diagram. Here you see our pink maintenance period highlighter. I hope this video has given you a good insight in how to work with calendars in the Visual Scheduling Widget. And in case of any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Our support team is looking forward to your questions, comments, and ideas.